Welcome, everyone. I know you've had a long week, but don't worry because I have a fantastic compilation for you today. Whether you're a regular viewer or new to our channel, we appreciate your support and hope you enjoy what we have in store. If you missed any of our previous videos or want to rewatch them, be sure to like and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear from you, so don't forget to leave a comment with your favorite timestamps. Let's get started. What's the worst crime you ever committed before you turned 10? Story 1. To be fair, I was involved in this, but it's a case of, wow, that escalated quickly, and older friends. We had a treehouse that got bulldozed during the clearing of our small forest behind our house. A new housing development was going in. We didn't know about it, and we were seriously ticked when we walked out one day to find a big ruin where our fort, belongings, treehouse, toys, and such used to be. We really didn't understand that our woods weren't really ours. Over the course of a weekend, we exacted our revenge. 1. Started a fire in the cab of a dump truck using the litter in the floorboard and the dash cigarette lighter. 2. Put gasoline from various equipment onto the foundation cinder blocks of the new homes, then burned them, which destroys the glue and turns the cinder blocks to powder as soon as weight goes on them. 3. Hot-wired a very large center hinge road scraper, Lulu or something, that we then proceeded to attempt to drive. Failing horribly, we bailed, then watched in sick fascination as it slowly plummeted over the side of the artificial lake that the housing development was digging. There was only a few feet of water in the bottom of the newly excavated lake at the time. Orange clay sides, and a muddy mess. Never got caught. This reminds me of the beginning of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, only Arthur Dent decided to get some revenge. That completely sucks that this forest and treehouse of yours was damaged by these developers. Sounds like the plot to a Disney TV movie. Did the police have any suspects at all on this? Story 2. Assault with bubble solution. When I was growing up, it was all boys on my street except for myself and a girl about 7 houses down. She was a total spoiled brat. She would always invite me over to play, but then wouldn't let me actually touch any of the toys I wanted to play with. As soon as I touched something, she'd say, "No, I'm playing with that. It's mine." I was pretty timid as a kid, so I tolerated it. Well, one day, when I was probably 8 and she was 7, I was playing with her, and it was more of the same. I'd finally had enough of her junk, so I snapped and grabbed an open bottle of bubble solution, quickly splashing the entire bottle on her. She started screaming and crying in the middle of the road because it got in her eyes. I freaked out and ran to my grandma's and hid. Shortly thereafter, some repair guy showed up at my grandma's to fix her cable or whatever and casually mentioned, "Man, there's a little girl down the street just screaming bloody unaliving." And my grandma gave me a look. Since she and I were the only girls on the street, my grandma immediately knew who it was and knew that I was likely involved. But my grandma never said anything else about it because she's old school and she didn't give a care if I was beating up that bratty little girl because she had it coming. I then proceeded to avoid the girl for the rest of my life. No contact at all? No confession? No retaliation or forgiveness? Was she that much of a brat? Story 3. A mentally challenged kid's magic cards. My brother had an IEP in school, individual education plan, which meant that he was always doing extra work outside of school to catch up to the rest of his class. One of these after-school activities just so happened to take place at a private school for less than gifted children. Now, I'm not sure of the circumstances. Maybe little Billy was being totally rambunctious and his teacher was punishing him by taking his only love, his magic cards, away during school hours. Or maybe his teacher hung on to the cards so she could reward him for good behavior throughout the day. In either case, she obviously got too comfortable and trusting with her class because she left those suckers right on top of her desk, face up. I looked at the top 2 cards and shoved them as far into my pockets as I possibly could and tried not to think about the poop storm that would go down come morning. I'm not sure what the actual cards were, but I do remember that the one on top was a 5-5 spider, and the other was a 5-7 or 7-7 basilisk-looking mother sucker. Both were huge improvements to my shoddily thrown-together deck. Anyways, totally got away with it, and ripped stuff up at school for like a week and a half, until my buddy went out and got Blaze. I remember when Magic the Gathering first came out. Went to the game store I usually go to, and everyone was surrounding this brand new card game. And then I remember not having any money, but a bunch of new booster packs. I really naively thought I could collect every card that was coming out. I had no idea of how much this game would last. Story 4. Stealing the teacher's wallet out of her purse and framing it on the class bully. I was a husky kid. One day I was talking to the girl I was crushing on in the hall, and we were released for recess. The class bully walked by and said, "What are you talking to her for, fatso?" My crush looked at him, then looked at me, and then walked away. This injustice cannot stand, I told myself. So the next day, when we were released for recess, I snuck back into our unlocked classroom. Our teacher smoked, so I knew she'd be out, and took her wallet out of her purse and stuffed it into the very bottom of the bully's desk cubby. Towards the end of the day, the teacher grabbed her purse and noticed it was missing her wallet. She then started rummaging through her desk drawers before finally looking at the class with a "you little jerks" look. She told us, "If you give me back my wallet now, you'll be in a lot less trouble than when I find it myself." Of course, no one except me knew where it was, so everyone kept quiet. Eventually, she got upset enough to start going through our stuff. When she found her wallet in the bully's desk, he started crying, saying, "I don't know how that got in there, Mrs. P. I didn't take it." He was sent to the principal's office, was expelled, and was eventually enrolled into another elementary school. Story 5. I was exactly 10, but I still feel as though this fits the thread. For context, at the start of the 5th grade, I was totally depressed. My family had just moved states, and I was thousands of miles away from all the friends I'd known in my life. I was also desperate for attention. My teacher had a class blog where she'd given us bell ringers to start the day. You know what I did? I completely made a terroristic threat. I anonymously wrote, not verbatim, but this is the gist, "I'm coming to school with a gun tomorrow. You'll all be sorry." This was right after the Sandy Hook shootings, so understandably everyone was completely terrified. The police were called, and I started crying and turned myself in. The aftermath was scary as hell. I don't know much about the legalities because I've never brought it up much to my parents, but I know a lawyer was hired. I spoke to him, and I almost went to state juvenile court before the whole case was dropped, probably because it was ridiculous. The only good thing that came out of all this was that I got the therapy that I needed, but man, and probably even more stressful on my parents. Too long didn't read? 5th grade me threatened to shoot up the school. Story 6. When I was 8, I had just gotten a new BMX bike, a shiny new Harrow, and at the time, all the boys on my block were obsessed with riding bikes. We would take our bikes down to the railroad tracks by my house and jump small ramps. One day, some boys decided to try and take my bike. They pushed me off of my bike and tried taking it. Being sort of small at the time, I kind of just let them do it. One of their parents showed up and made the boy give me my bike back. Decidedly sick of their junk, I went home and grabbed my dad's pocket knife. I rode my bike around the tracks for about an hour, waiting for one of the boys to mess with me. They didn't, and I got impatient, so I started ramping the bigger jumps. That's when the oldest boy, around 11 at the time, spoke up. "Nice bike, punk," he said, riding up the ramp. What I did next I still remember vividly. Riding away from the ramp, I jumped off my bike, ran to him, and stabbed him in the arm. He started to scream for his mom, and I quickly ran home. My dad got a call from his mom later on. She wasn't mad because he had provoked it. but I still feel awful about the bandages he had to wear for the next 2 weeks. Sure, we all need to stand up for ourselves and learn how to take charge. This was just a bit too far. This guy was obsessed with making the other kids pay for what they did. Was this the first time this kid had been a bully? I think at this point you'd have to have a talk with him. If anything, to try and keep him safe. Safe from any other kids who will stand up to him being a bully. When did doing the right thing horribly backfire? Story 1. At my last retail management job, I was cashing out one of the cashiers, and her till was $300 short. On the nose. Normally, there wasn't that much cash in there, but someone had paid for a crib in cash about 20 minutes before, and since she was leaving soon, me and the store manager, decided to just let it go. So I tell her she's short, she has no idea where it is. Empties her pockets, her idea, nothing. Shows me her purse, nothing. Look in all the parts of the drawer, nothing. Look through the tape with all the transactions, nothing for no sales or anything. Just disappeared. This is where my good deed goes punished. The cash drawers have locks that could be opened, but we didn't have keys for them. I grab every random key I can find in the office and try them. Finally, with a little jimmying, a maintenance key opens the drawer. I try it a few times. Works. Show my manager, and while it doesn't find the money, it's a clue. At least we know there's a key that will open the drawers, and we can fix that, is what I'm thinking. I come in the next day, get called into the office with my boss and the store owners. I figure they want to talk about it. What I figured out. Maybe give me a medal. Nope. Fired me. For A, leaving the cash in there even though my boss said to, and B, compromising the integrity of the cash by having a key lying around. I.e., I found out how it might have happened. My manager walked me out, and his final words were, "Sorry, but we had to punish someone for something after this." This happened where I worked. I wasn't a manager, but I was the one with the most seniority. I had given 7 years of my life to this place. It was my godmother's company. Money went missing. Random girl who used to be supervisor, let's call her M, shows up out of nowhere. No one had told her to come and asks to search us. No problem, right? I mean, the supervisors who were there had already done that. Then she takes me and the other cashier, let's call her T. She tells me and T to strip. We both just look at her like, what the hell? She said to remove all clothing so she can check. We didn't want to get blamed for it, so we did. Nothing there. We're good, right? Wrong. A week later, I get called to my boss's office. Long story short, M says I did it. She said she saw me have the money but didn't want to embarrass me. In total, like $35,000 was missing over 3 or 4 instances. I started bawling. This job was my life and family, and I was being kicked out for no reason. They asked me to admit it. I said no. I even showed them my bank statements willingly and showed that I still owed $170 to my school. My godmother felt like hell. My godbrother was just ice. Told me I had to leave and couldn't work there again. Said bye to everyone and left. M quit 3 weeks later and went on an impromptu trip to Greece for 3 weeks. Every time I see her, I want to absolutely rip her hair out. I was going through enough junk without her taking my support system from me. I know it was her. She was the one that always checked our caches. So no one was tipped off by her trip to Greece? There was no repercussions after that? It wasn't exactly family, it was her godmother. But couldn't she have appealed to this family? I've had jobs where I've been ousted for something that seems to be out of the blue. It really sucks. I've never been good at office politics. You just feel so helpless. You're doing all the right things. You're doing your work to your best capacity. Everyone tells you you're doing a good job, and then you're out for no reason at all. It feels so disempowering. Story 2. My wife and I were flying from Montreal to Vienna 2 years ago. We were flying coach, so of course we're the last aboard. I see a lady sleeping in the waiting room at the gate. Good Samaritan that I like to think I am, I gently wake her and ask if she's going to Vienna. She says that yes, she is, so I tell her that it's final boarding. Away we go, and she gets on behind us. As we're taking our seats, She goes by us, and we smell the alcohol vapors. Oh no. Anyway, we get our seatbelts on, and they start pushing the plane out to the taxiway. The flight attendants go through the cabin checking seatbelts. But when they get to drunk lady, they can't wake her up. So overcome all the flight attendants, shaking her, trying to wake her up. Finally, they start calling for a doctor on the flight. Someone speaks up and is a nurse. They try and fail. So back the plane goes to the gate. On come the EMS and haul her out. 2 hours later, we're sitting at the gate while they try to find her luggage to pull off the flight. I sank deep into my seat and hoped like hell no one saw me wake her up to get on the flight. Too long didn't read? Woke up a woman who was going to miss her flight, got the flight delayed by almost 3 hours when they couldn't wake her up for pre-flight check. Edit. Location names. Oh my God, that's a terrible and cruel reaction. I'm really sorry you had to go through that. Not only did she betray a safe place to go to, she needlessly humiliated you for something she wasn't sure of. I hope you're doing okay. When our mother found out that I was intimately active by seeing my birth control packets, she made a huge deal about it, announced it to the whole family, including my dad, who was very sad and disappointed, and initially embarrassed the hell out of me. Thank you. I'm sorry you had to experience that as well. I thought I was being responsible by being on birth control, and yes, we did use condoms until we figured out that my V-spot just does not like latex. And while I see her concern, even the physician told me they wanted to do another test to make sure, because they oftentimes get false positives for HPV. She made it out like I was a party girl who slept around in a very, very subtle way, because having intimacy with one person unprotected is like having intimacy with anyone they've had intimacy with, and anyone that person had intimacy with. It was just a big, assuming cluster mess that really let me down and made me realize that parents are not God. Parents are human like I am human, and they make mistakes that will mess you up because they're full of good intentions. I just haven't found out how to tell them that in a way that doesn't make them feel like they did wrong by me. They didn't. They just sometimes let me down. I think a couple of stories got mixed up here. We went from someone that couldn't wake up from being drunk on a plane to a woman getting embarrassed by their parents for having birth control pills. Maybe the original story from that second one will show up later on. But that is embarrassing. That line of, if you've been intimate with someone, you've been intimate with everyone they've been intimate with, and so on, was very big in the 80s. That line took place during the AIDS epidemic. It was a line that was used to try and get people to have some form of restraint. Story 3. My best friend was going through a messy breakup with his girlfriend. She was ticked, so she stole a bunch of his clothes and his cat and drove off to her apartment. We jumped into my car and gave chase. She pulled into her apartment complex and parked before realizing we were behind her, so I pulled up behind her and blocked her car in. She started screaming at me to move my car, and I said, "Hell no," while my friend called the cops. He had had that cat for 8 years and was desperately attached to it. He had only had the girlfriend for 2 years. The cops get there, and they talk to everyone. They figure out the situation. They tell the girlfriend to return the cat and the clothes. Then an officer comes over to me and says he's considering arresting me for false imprisonment. My amazed jaw dropped. Normally, I'm super respectful and cool with the cops, but it was just too much for me to swallow. Are you kidding me right now? Not at all. You put your car behind hers, making it impossible for her to leave. You kept her there against her will, and that's a crime. She could have gotten out of the car and walked away at any time. I was only stopping her from fleeing the scene with stolen property. I stared at him sullenly, a look of "you can't be completely serious" on my face. I guess we don't have to do anything this time, but next time you shouldn't get involved in disputes like this. It's a matter for the police, and you should leave it up to us. Jeez, what an absolute mess that night was. Fun fact, you were right. General law in the U.S. Rules for false imprisonment. The direct restraint of one person of the physical liberty of another without adequate legal jurisdiction. Big Town Nursing Home Incorporated versus Newman 461 SW2D 195. And the Restatement Second of Torts 42, there is no liability for intentionally confining another unless the person physically restrained knows of the confinement or is harmed by it. You did not impede the physical liberty of her if she had a reasonable means to escape, and simply getting out of the car was a reasonable means. Also, you have a right to recover your property and protect it from conversion, which is what she was doing trying to steal your cat, as long as you use reasonable means in recovery, which is essentially not physically harming her. According to his story, he had plenty of legal justification since they witnessed the theft firsthand. As far as I'm concerned, the cops were being hypocrites because they first agreed with his friend and asked the girl to return the stolen cat, and then get on original person's case for false imprisonment, even though they had just previously agreed she was guilty of a crime. The only thing I can think of is maybe they had to tell this guy he could have been arrested for false imprisonment because the girl could have turned around if that hadn't happened and said they were being partial to their side. Why was she being charged with stolen property while they weren't being charged for false imprisonment? Maybe they had to appear impartial. That might not be the case, but that's the only thing I can come up with right now. Who was your coworker from hell? Story 1. I quit smoking due to a coworker that would follow me to every smoke break to talk about their problems when I needed some Godzilla me time. It's been 3 years and I still haven't bothered to pick the habit back up. Edit to answer some questions. 1. In real life, I'm super introverted. They just started joining me one day and decided I am their best friend ever. 2. They were trying to get me to smoke more often so they could talk at me more. They do not and have never smoked. I was intending on quitting at some point, but I would probably still be smoking without this factor. 3. They were very upset when I quit, so much that they started crying. I can never tell them they're the reason I quit, even though I probably owe them my life. 4. I split the word Godzilla for emphasis. Godzilla. I'm sure you realize that's not the actual word, but I gotta be careful because of the Google censor algorithm. 5. They're nice enough and want to be helpful, but they're also oddly possessive and would get angry with me and mess with my stuff when I wouldn't go on breaks with them. Our shift would probably drown without this person, very hardworking. But I've spoken with management and been on the verge of going to HR over their weird control issues. They started escalating their behavior shortly before the pandemic hit. The one person that tolerated their demands for an extended period of time got fired, putting 100% of their focus on me. Luckily, telling them they've crossed the line and refusing to engage with them for a day gets them to back off for the chance of having someone to talk to again. Working from home has been the best thing ever, and I'm worried about going back and having to figure out what to do with the dynamic. And we're starting off strong. It's stories like this that make me glad I get to work remotely. Texts and voice chats are much easier to deal with. I don't care about pizza parties. I can buy my own pizza, thank you very much. Story 2. Okay, this may not be my most hellish coworker, but I have a weird one for you guys. My first job ever was at a coffee shop chain. The location I was at was connected to a gas station/convenience store. We kinda had an L-shaped corner of the store. As such, we didn't have a ton of space, including room for the larger ovens needed to cook bagels. So instead, we would have our bagels delivered to us from another larger location down the road. For a while, the baker was this really weird, quiet girl who seemed to lack social self-awareness. She always seemed a little unclean and just lingered a little too long around people without really saying anything. Honestly, she just put out not quite right vibes. Anyway, one day I head in at 6 and there are no bagels. I asked my manager if the store down the road was running behind or if they had a call-out. Both were fairly common. My manager points to the rack of newspapers the convenience store had by the entrance and tells me to read the headline. Apparently, the weird girl was in FBI custody. Basically, there was a couple who had kidnapped a minor. I won't get into why, as it may be a trigger warning for some. Weird girl was renting a room from the couple, knew what was happening, and never told anyone. Somehow, they were all found out and arrested, and the young girl was reunited with her family. Reading the story, the whole thing felt very Twilight Zone. I'd agree it's not the weirdest. At least it's not the weirdest while she was at work. She seemed to do her job. I don't know if anyone complained about her. In a way, she epitomizes having a good work-life balance. She was able to keep that stuff separate and maintain a good work ethic. Story 3. There was a person that was in the aircraft qualification training squadron at the same time as me. He wasn't an intentionally terrible person, but his lack of self-awareness made any interaction around him difficult and exhausting. He washed out of another flying career field. In the first sims, before the flying phase, he refused to use established procedures, resulting in degraded ability to provide required data to external players. Managed to fail his first instructional ride, despite it being nearly impossible to fail if you show up. He could not figure out how to take leave, despite several people walking him through the process. Rather than trying to solve any problem, he would announce it to the rest of the room, and if no one jumped in to help him, ask the nearest person. He managed to frustrate and time-jack the kindest instructor I know because he didn't have a basic understanding of a training airspace. In a bid to get back to more pressing and more likely to be completed tasks, he gave me an apologetic look as he suggested that Lieutenant Pubspotter was a smart student and could probably help him get up to speed. I could not. Maybe he wasn't from hell, but he sounds like he just didn't qualify for this job. He was just too in over his head. Was this something this guy wanted to do for so long? It sounds like he just so desperately wants to be in the aircraft field in some way. It makes me wonder if he ever passed here. Story 4. I briefly had a coworker at my current job at a local grocery store. We'll just call him Fred. Fred is one of those people who's always talking on his phone in the break room, and that's my personal pet peeve at work. More often than not, he's usually arguing with his girlfriend, and he doesn't seem to care that anyone's listening. He'd do other annoying, gross things, like chewing with his mouth wide open and wiping his boogers all over the place. But then there was one day when he tried to flush a Hot Pocket down the toilet. Needless to say that it didn't play out so well, and that temporarily put an end to our closest employee restroom right by the break room. He surprisingly didn't get fired over that. But he did get fired when one of his old high school teachers came in shopping and he threw a whole sack of potatoes at her. She was an elderly woman who got seriously injured, and both the ambulance and the cops had to get involved. I never did hear about what happened to his old teacher, but Fred, on the other hand, is currently in jail for not only assaulting his teacher, but he apparently also attacked his lawyer for reasons unknown. That's Fred. Story 5. My old boss could be really good, but here are some of the things leading up to her getting fired. She would berate people into taking her random vitamins. She would insist that we all attend her hot yoga class. She would get people to do it by putting them on the clock. She would pinch your arm if she didn't like what you were saying to a customer. I had to share a room with her at a conference. She slept naked. She got so drunk she went to hang out with a random couple in their room, came back, and puked all over our room. She would climb ladders in front of customers while wearing tiny dresses. And on and on and on. Edit. Wow, I did not expect anyone to even react to this. Thanks for the silver. I worked at a fancy bath bomb store in the UK. No, she was not my type. My type is men. She would pit me and the other floor managers against each other. We would have to go to her apartment when we were on the clock to make the schedule. She didn't own a microwave because... the microwaves, I think? She really hated our only male floor manager. Probably because he'd applied for her job before she got it. He was no threat, so I didn't get why. Right before she got fired, we had a team meeting in a park. Employees brought their dogs, smoked, and were downright mean to her. She brought it all on herself, but it was awkward to watch. Story 6. A few years ago, back at my old job, we hired a web developer who on her first day on the job yelled at our CTO because her mouse didn't work. She proceeded to be not just unpleasant, but actively hostile to everyone she interacted with. I came in one morning at like 7 a.m. because I needed to test some stuff and saw her at her desk eating a box of 7-Eleven wings and chugging a 2-liter Diet Coke. She then threw the box of bones into a bin and missed, spilling it everywhere, and she yelled really loudly, "Freaking Godzilla it! Arrgh!" While me and 3 others were in the office. We all gave her the benefit of the doubt of extreme antisocial programmer personality, or maybe had personal problems to deal with, and everyone tried to be nice. The last straw was when she berated the most beloved guy in the office, one of the IT personnel that everyone liked, and she gave him a sort of schoolmaster-style talking down to in front of the whole office because her internet was slow. She was fired within like 2 weeks of hiring. Also, she smelled like old eggs and mildew. Another reason why it's good to look for remote work. I think a lot of managers that want everybody to go back to the office think that people will always be able to play off the positive energy of each other. I don't think any of them take into account that there are some people that just continuously generate negative energy. It just brings everybody down. This person got fired, but there are some of those people that just manage to stay on for who knows what reason. It doesn't do productivity or anybody else any good at all. What is your craziest, most interesting, I need a favor, no questions asked story? Story 1. Not me, but a family member. He was U.S. Air Force with a number of people under his command and stationed in Nevada, if I remember correctly. In the middle of the night, one of his guys shows up on his porch, banging on his door as if his life depended on it. "Sir, I've done messed up. I need your help to fix it. Can you come with me?" With nothing more than saying, "Son, whatever it is you need, we'll get through it." He dons his dungarees and gets in the guy's car, and they drive off into the dead of night. He notices they're headed out of town, into the desert, in the pitch black of night. He tries to get the driver to talk, and the guy just sort of breaks down. "I had an argument with my woman, so I drove her out into the desert and left her there. I done messed up. They'll boot me out for sure after this." The boss is doing his best to keep the guy calm, reassure him that he's going to come out of this okay. Outwardly, he's serene, but he's getting more anxious by the minute. They drove further and further into the desert, finally pulling off the road. They get out, and the guy goes into his trunk, hands over a flashlight, and points his boss towards where he left the girl. Boss starts calling out, hoping the girl was nearby, and turns to ask the airman for his girl's name. While turning, the beam of his flashlight hits the guy, and all the tumblers scarily clicked into place. The airman was carrying a shovel. In the heat of an argument, the airman strangled his gal to termination and drove her out into the desert in a state of panic over what he'd done. So he went to the one guy he knew could help him to set things to rights. His boss. His boss that somehow now found himself helping to dig a shallow grave and trying to seem supportive. After all, here he was in the desert with an unaliver. Nobody knew where he was, and certain expiration awaited at the hands of this guy, or those of Mother Nature, if he couldn't keep a cool head. The officer was smart about it. He convinced the airman to bury her shallow, so the scavengers could come and clean up, and so the job only took a few minutes. They go back to the car, and he casually manages to leave the shovel stabbed upright into the roadside to mark the location. On the drive back into the city, the airman is almost euphoric, relieved. The boss keeps reassuring him all the way back into town, just waiting to get out of the danger zone that is the desert. As they pull into the city, the boss has his airman pull into an all-night drive-in diner and then pays for burgers, fries, and shakes. When the meal's almost done, he tells the kid, "You know what you've got to do, son. You know I can't do it for you." The guy kind of nods, walks over to a payphone, and dials up the cops to confess. I was just about to talk about why did he go along with burying the girl, but then I remembered he was in the desert alone with this person. I will hand it to the officer. He kept a very cool head. Got him back into town, got some food in him to help him sort of get his head straight. It's also good that this guy respected the officer enough to turn himself in. Very scary story. Story 2. Freshman year of college, I was rooming with 3 strangers. One, M, partied quite a bit and came home drunk often, and occasionally brought back girls. The university is a dry campus, and the police love to crack down on drunk college students. M comes to the dorm one night shouting, "Lock the door!" So we let him in. One roommate locks the door and starts looking through the peephole, fully expecting police officers to run by. We ask him what's going on. He doesn't respond for a minute or so, and we're getting more nervous. He heaves out, "I just ran here from X bar." That bar was over 2 miles away, and M was very drunk, so an impressive feat to stay upright for that distance. Still no police officers. Finally, one roommate just asks if he's running from the police. M shakes his head, then says, "The girl tried to violate me." Now we're shocked, and we go from not wanting the police to asking if he wants the police. A headshake for no. The rest of the story comes out. Spoiler alert, there wasn't attempted violation, but that's just how he chose to tell the story. So he ran into a girl at the bar he'd been hooking up with. They were talking, getting ready for another round that night, and drinking lots of sake. Then M finds out this girl is in a long-distance relationship. He nopes out of there, and she doesn't like this. So she chases him back for these 2 miles, lots of it through campus, yelling at him to try to do her. He only loses her at the entrance to our building, which needs a key card. The next month, we're talking to some friends and tell them this story, and they look at each other and laugh. Turns out that night they came back from their dorm later than M, and they encountered the girl outside the building an hour later, and she asks to be let in. They didn't recognize her and could tell she was drunk and said no. So good to know drunk M still has high morals. He calmed down with his partying quite a bit after that. Very sinister opening to this story. It's good to know that this man makes decisions even though he's very drunk. It sounds like that kind of thinking really helped him to calm down. I wonder if his studies improved after that. Hopefully he was able to get a degree out of that college and not just a bunch of stories of parties. Story 3. I was 17 and my father and mother traveled to the countryside for their 21st wedding anniversary. A few hours after they left, I got a call from my father saying he needed me to do something for him. The serious tone he used made me say, "Sure, absolutely," without knowing what he was about to ask. He told me to go out to the front where there would be a wrapped present on the foot of the driveway. He told me not to open it, look around to see if anybody was watching, then put it in my car and drive it to a commercial waste dumpster up the road and throw it out. I then had thoughts like, is my father a substance dealer? And has he gotten himself in trouble with some gang? I asked him what the heck was going on, and he just reiterated that he needed me to do this for him without any questions or opening of the gift. I did exactly as he asked. I picked up the gift, made sure nobody was watching, and threw it out in the appropriate dumpster. I never found out exactly what was in that box, and never opened it. However, shortly after, my mother became suspicious of him having an affair. After my father denying it, but his story unraveling over time, he was found by my mother in bed with another woman. My mom shortly after tried to terminate herself. They then both involved myself and my brother in painful attempts of pitting us against one parent or another. I later found out the box almost certainly just contained pictures of my dad smashing this mistress, whom he is now married to. I don't speak to my parents much anymore and moved upstate. The dad is a douche for putting the kid in the middle of this. Were those pictures consensual? How did they end up as a present? This kid was unwittingly part of a cover-up of the dad's affair. That wasn't right. Story 4. I was brushing my teeth at 6 a.m. before I had to go out and run a volunteer event with 10 other people. We were picking up furniture on my college campus right before graduation. I get a call from my buddy who is also volunteering, and he says, "I need you to come over now." I finish quickly and put my shoes on and run over to his place. It's a small campus, so it takes me 5-10 minutes or so. I go to his dorm and he lets me in. "There's some girl in my room and she won't leave." I assume he brought someone home last night, but whatever, I got it. Go into his place. It's a suite, so a long hallway with 4 or 5 rooms, and I make it to his room. This girl is on the floor without shoes, but otherwise fully clothed. She's leaning against his dresser. I start to calmly ask her where her shoes are, where she's from, etc. Starts mumbling something, and at this point I'm convinced she's on something. Continue to try to find her shoes until she throws her friend's cleats at me. At this point, I pick her up by her wrists and walk her out of the room. Apparently, she stumbled into his room and woke him up by breaking things in his place. I leave to go finish getting ready for my event when she's still outside and tries to swing at me. I'm not a big guy, but I was a wrestler, so I keep trying to keep her away and not trying to hurt someone. She stops trying to follow me after missing a punch, and I leave thinking it's over. I walk by his dorm 45 minutes later, and there's 5 cop cars and an ambulance. Confused, I pass by and look on, and there's a mystery girl bleeding and handcuffed. Turns out she tried to fight campus security when they asked her name and offered to drive her home. Happens, I guess. Story 5. Got a call from a friend at 4 in the morning one night declaring that he needed some help. We both lived in the same dorm at the time, and I figured he was just trying to get in without being seen by the resident assistant drunk, because we were both underage at the time. My groggy butt didn't ask any questions and went down to the side door to let him in. He wasn't there, though. I looked around, called his name a couple of times, smoked a cig, and went back inside because it was cold as Santa's spears outside. I tried calling him again to no avail and ended up going to his room to see if his roommate knew where he was. Turns out he was in there, naked, handcuffed to the bed, with a gag around his neck that he spat out. I laughed so hard I woke the neighbors up, then they laughed with me. We let him out, and he proceeded to tell us this story of this fine woman grinding on him and handcuffing him to a bed. Apparently, she was on top, and right before he got lucky, she hopped off, laughed at him, and told him to figure it out when he asked how he was getting out. That's when he laid there for what he said was 3 hours trying to get his phone from his desk at the foot of the bed to his face so he could call. Felt bad for him, but never letting him live that one down. Imagine if a man did that to a woman. He would be a registered S offender and probably in prison for a very long time. What's the most awkward moment you've ever had? Story 1. I was living with a friend for a while, and during this time there were many awkward moments, the most of which follows. We were sitting down, smoking herb, and playing video games. We were having a pretty good time. We were laughing and joking and stuff, and the day had gone pretty well so far. Throughout this period, the phone would periodically ring, and my friend would return looking ticked off after each call. The phone rang maybe about 20 or so times over a 2-hour period. Clearly, someone was being a butthole. Another hour goes by with just as many calls, and eventually his mom returns home from work a few hours earlier than she normally would have. A little while later, a car pulled up out front, and someone was laying on the horn. It's the butthole. It was my buddy's father, who was unmatched in douchebaggery and being a peenhead. He gets out of the car, slams the door behind him, hops the fence, avoiding the gate altogether, bolts up the front steps, and proceeds to pound on the door like a jerkwad. Buddy goes to answer the door, and they both enter nonchalantly. They leave the living room and enter the kitchen and have what seemed like a pretty civil discussion. 10 minutes go by, and during this time, I'm shooting stuff in Halo. Buddy re-enters the living room, followed by his father, who has the look of a clinically constipated man. Buddy sits down and picks up his controller and begins to help me shoot stuff. Not even a second later, his father screams, "What the frick are you doing, you fat frick? Why don't you go out for a walk?" My buddy tells him to go be intimate with himself and to leave. Awkwardness sets in. I keep my eyes on the screen, and his dad quietly stands there glaring at us both for at least a couple of minutes. More awkward. "Why don't you get a freaking job, huh?" "I have a job, Dad." "Well, why the frick aren't you working?" "Today's my day off, peenhead." "Curse you! Don't talk to me like that! I'm your freaking father! You should respect me, fat jerk." "Dad, you're a butthole. You treat me, Mom, and sister like filth. You don't talk to me or sister at all. You left Mom because you're an alcoholic substance user, and you're the one without a job. So why don't you leave?" blah, blah, blah. Dialogue continues, all while me and my buddy are tearing through hordes of enemies. My friend doesn't miss a beat, but eventually he does lose his temper. He begins screaming, and now there's a shouting match going on with me sitting there. Maximum awkward achieved. I had no idea what to do, so I quietly set the controller down and inched my way out of the room. Too long didn't read? Buddy and his father had a screaming match no more than 10 feet away from me. As far as I know, Buddy made Dad his shrew. Man win for him. Were the emotions just that high that they felt they had to have this discussion with this other person in the room? Did they acknowledge him at all? I want to know if they had a conversation afterwards about it. I wonder if the guy just avoided hanging out with this person for a while. Was the dad hoping to shame this guy in front of his friend? Story 2. I was dating a girl in high school once who had a really messed up family. Total rednecks. Her mom had to have weighed more than 300 pounds, was rude, an enormous slob. She always had food stains on her clothes and pretty ignorant. Her dad was pretty much the same, only in better shape, obviously bitter and constantly in a bad mood. My girlfriend, let's call her Samantha, hinted at the fact that he was emotionally and physically abusive after we broke up. She was pretty hot, by the way, and smart too. GT program, honors classes, a real package, but for the family. Many years after we dated, I know she actually took her parents to court and got emancipated. Physical shaming was involved, so yeah, bad situation. Anyway, we didn't ever hang out at her house. Always my parents' house, school, or someplace around town with her or my friends. I don't know the reason at the time, so one day I decided to surprise her, bought some roses, and came over to her place with the flowers. Her mom answers the door and is all suspicious. When I asked for Samantha, she starts screaming at the top of her lungs for her husband. Samantha's dad came out, looks at me, looks at the flowers, and starts flying off the handle. I'm stuck outside, dumbfounded and bewildered as he storms around the house. I can hear him rummaging around, throwing stuff, shouting, "Where is it?" And then finally I hear a kind of triumphant, "Aha!" Next thing I know, I can hear Samantha's voice saying, "No, Daddy, please," over and over again, and her fat slob of a mom is staring at me with a smug smile. Next thing I can hear is a dog yelping, a screen door being tossed open, and then, bang, a gunshot. Samantha starts crying, and the dog has gone silent. The mom slams the door, and I hear yelling on the inside of the house. I'm still confused, until the door opens, and it's the father screaming, "Get the frick off our yard!" So, yeah, I do what he says. I found out later, when Samantha broke up with me, that her dad had told her if she ever brought a boy to the house, he was going to unalive her dog. And he did. That's why we never hung out at her house. She had never told me because she didn't want me to know how messed up her home life was. Too long didn't read? Girlfriend's dad shot her dog because she was dating someone. Poor everyone around this situation. This guy was just wanting to surprise this girl. Must have felt really guilty for being the cause of the dog's death, although not intentionally. There should have been some communication at this point. I'm pretty sure she started planning her emancipation on day one. I wonder if their breaking up had anything to do with this situation. Story 3. Oh God, I can be an extremely awkward person at times. Here is one of my worst "what the hell was I thinking" moments. I had plans to hang out with my friend Dom. We had been hallway friends for the majority of high school, but only recently had started hanging out. Keep in mind, I'm extremely shy and awkward when I first start getting to know someone, and since we had only recently begun to hang out, I was still in the awkward phase. He had an appointment, at the time I didn't know what for, which is a very important detail, set for after school, so I told him I could just pick him up somewhere in town after he was done. We decide on Safeway, which is a pretty central location. I pull into the Safeway parking lot, and I see him walk up to the car. He's all smiles. I'm not really sure what the occasion is, but it's always nice to see someone happy. I unlock the door and let him in. The first thing he does is flash a huge grin, moves his face in super close and asks, "Notice anything?" Little awkward old me has no idea what he's talking about and frantically searches for anything noticeable. Since he's smiling so big, My eyes are naturally drawn to his teeth, which were in some need of brushing. Never in my entire life will I ever understand why I did this, but I gave out a little half laugh and say, "Nothing a little brushing won't fix." His smile dropped. "I just got my braces off." "Oh, I done messed up." He looked like he just got beat over the head with a sack of unalive puppies. I saw the words leaving my lips as joy-seeking missiles, and each one scored a direct hit. We drove in silence to his house. Continued to hang out afterwards, but never spoke of that situation again. Again, it comes down to communication. Maybe this person should have asked what the appointment was for. Maybe the dude should have volunteered what he was there for. I could understand if these were the type of braces that were behind the teeth. I might not understand if they were the regular braces that would be seen over the teeth. Story 4. I'm currently dating a Pakistani girl. I was over at her house watching a movie, and I jokingly said that she owed me $20. She did. Normally I wouldn't care, but I needed gas money. This escalated, and we had a little argument and were just silent for a while, which is normal for us when we have an argument. We just shut up and let it pass. So 5 minutes later or so, her parents and aunt come downstairs to watch the movie with us. This is where it starts to get awkward. They notice we aren't speaking to each other, and her father starts speaking to her in Urdu. She sort of just brushes him off in English. "Not now, Dad." He says something again, then her mom says something, then her aunt says something. My girlfriend again basically just says, "Not now," in English. Mind you, it's not uncommon for them to speak Urdu around me. It's their first language, after all. So they keep talking in Urdu, gesturing at me. My girlfriend is becoming more and more visibly upset. I have no idea what is happening at this point. Eventually, she just goes to her room. I'm left sitting there while her mom and aunt watch the movie and chat in Urdu. The aunt's English isn't very good, and her father glances between me and the movie. I excuse myself to go to the bathroom and then go talk to my girlfriend. Her family was asking what happened, but she just wanted a little privacy. I seriously had no idea what was happening. Too long didn't read? My girlfriend's Pakistani family was arguing about me in Urdu while I was sitting next to them. I had no idea what was happening. People say it's rude to speak a foreign language in front of those who don't speak it. While I agree, this has never been an issue before, and hasn't since then. These people have treated me like a son since I started dating their daughter. They're kind people.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.